This episode will be completely taken out of context. Welcome to the Fact Check This podcast.
All right, Fact Check This daily. And today, let's take a look at 4 states that could potentially decide that they want to secede from the United States in order to avoid a second Trump presidency. Yes, that sounds insane, and it is insane. It is the mindset of the insane people. But this article came from Newsweek, so insane is kind of par for the course. Let's take a look and dive in. 4 states could secede from the U.S. and join Canada to avoid Trump, says a Democrat. And this was just from a couple weeks ago on November 29th. A prominent Democratic New York state senator has floated the fanciful proposition that her state and its northeastern neighbors secede from the United States to join Canada to avoid President-elect Donald Trump's return to office. Liz Krueger, who chairs the New York State Senate Finance Committee, argued that the Empire State, Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Vermont could all suffer under Trump's new administration. Citing his proposed crackdown on immigration and promise of mass deportation, the Manhattan Democrat believes liberal and sanctuary states such as New York could be threatened with cuts in the amount of federal funding they receive. Thank you. Thank you for being so bold as to admit the truth. The only reason that you are flooding your states with illegal immigrants is for the federal funding that you get from it. Thank you for that admission. And maybe you should leave either way, because even if there's not a crackdown on the immigration side of stuff, I would be willing to bet that your state will not continue to get the same amount of federal funding, if any at all, for housing and these illegal immigrants and for being sanctuary states and sanctuary cities. I mean, this senator is from the Bronx, it says, and Eric Adams, the mayor of New York City, is already on board with deportations and trying to get the immigration problem under control. So maybe not all New Yorkers are going to be quite so on board with her idea anyway. They could be threatened with cuts in the amount of federal funding they receive, a move the incoming leader and his cabinet have suggested, should states oppose the new policy measures. This is not the first time the New York Democrat has offered up a radical and improbable plan to counter Trump's policies, suggesting in September, ahead of his election win, that the bloc of blue states should join Canada. I thought I would suggest to Canada that instead of us all trying to illegally cross the border at night without them noticing, which is pretty hard because there's a lot of us, that they should instead agree to let us be the Southeast Province, a new province of Canada. And I offered, even though I hadn't gotten agreement from other states yet, that I thought New York, Connecticut, Massachusetts, Vermont would combine and be a great new province as the Southeast Province of Canada, Krueger said in site City and State New York. Newsweek reached out to Krueger for comment via email. This is, for those who are watching, I guess I only do this as a video stream, so you have to be watching. And if you're just listening to me talk and you're not actually paying attention to the screen, look at the screen for just a moment. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the impressive figure that is Liz Krueger. I mean, man, just to see these people says it all every single time. New York sends approximately $362 billion each year in tax revenue to the federal government, but receives roughly $85 billion in federal funding, much of which is set aside for Medicare spending, according to Politico. In order to offset a potential block in federal funding to the state, Krueger has suggested a solution. We're talking a lot of money, Krueger told Politico. We're talking money we couldn't possibly replace unless we started sending the feds a lot less money. In the wake of Trump's 2024 presidential victory, there has been a surge in interest among Americans interested in moving abroad, with many eyeing Canada as a potential destination. Searches for moving to Canada peaked on Google Trends on the evening of Tuesday, November 5th, And the next day, the search engine detected the highest search volumes for terms such as how to legally move to Canada, moving to Canada from the U.S., and moving to Canada requirements from traditionally progressive states, including Oregon, Washington, New Hampshire, and Vermont. Basically, everybody in these states are progressive Democrats. We would fit in pretty well with the political philosophy of at least most of the Canadian elected officials, Kruger said in the City and State New York interview. A lot of like northern New York, upstate New York, they might disagree with you on that. There's a lot of large swaths of New York State that go predominantly red every single election. New York City carries the state to be Democrat pretty consistently, but there are a lot of Republicans outside of the cities. They might disagree with you. Similar thing for like Washington and Oregon. Say Washington and Oregon wanted to form a coalition and depart and join Canada. Okay, cool. There are significant portions of the eastern, not even eastern half, like eastern 2/3 to 3/4 of those states that are almost exclusively red and would probably not want to join Canada. So like maybe y'all should just go through with packing up and fucking off and getting out. Like it's why like when you look at and Johnny and I did this on Peddling Fiction a while back, like when you start to split up the states and you look at like how would Civil War #2 look, or in the event of a Hunger Games style like district split, how would that look? You can't go based on state lines. Like it would be virtually impossible to do state lines for doing those splits. Like when you look at like Chicago, fuck Chicago, dump Chicago in the Great Lakes or send it off to be a part of Canada, whatever. But like the southern 2/3 of Illinois doesn't want anything to do with Chicago. It's mostly red country. It's a lot of farm country. Like it's hard to split these up like based on state lines, and that would be the problem here, especially with New York, but also with maybe not so much with Connecticut or even Massachusetts, but maybe with Vermont. You know, I mean, it would be interesting to see how something like this would actually work, and I bet you would have a large percentage of those states that would vote against that and would be trying to move to other states and stay in the U.S. However, with questions over the implications of withholding federal tax dollars and a Republican majority in Congress, Kruger's proposition is very unlikely to be realized and has been met with concern from her Democratic colleagues. It is not our job to pick up the pitchforks that have been dropped by his many followers, Long Island Assembly member Chuck Levine said in a recent interview with Politico's New York Playbook. The fact that they are still so hell-bent on this idea that like Trump's followers were the radical, insane, like pitchfork-wielding mob, like how out of touch with reality could you be? About as out of touch with reality as it would take you to be to think that New York and Connecticut and Massachusetts and Vermont could and would join Canada or become a part of Canada. While Vice President Kamala Harris secured the majority of votes needed to win the Empire State, Trump received 44% of the vote, according to the Associated Press, with New York coming its closest to turning red in almost 4 decades, per reports from the New York Post. So, and I think Connecticut and Massachusetts also had not as big but similar red swings. Vermont, I'm not sure. Vermont's like a really weird state. I can't get a good feel on Vermont because it tends to be a very rural state, but they're also like psychotically progressive. And then they got Bernie Sanders, and like Vermont is like a whole ass hippie commune that just like I can't figure out what the fuck's going on with Vermont. But you know, the idea of secession as like to join Canada, and then you got Trump making jokes about annexing Canada and making Canada our 51st state. So go ahead, New York, go ahead, leave and join Canada, and then you can just be the 50th state all over again with the rest of Canada dragging you along. That would be absolute perfection. And like secession and stuff is always something that gets talked about. I think the more important topic in this is where she talks about the amount of money, so the 85 billion or so that they claim that New York state gets back from the federal government in subsidies versus the 300 billion that they supposedly pay in. Why doesn't anybody talk about that? Like the way that this whole, the way that the tax structure was intended to begin with was that the states collected taxes and used the taxes to do their own thing. The federal government was not supposed to be this leviathan that it is. The states were only supposed to send to the federal government effectively enough money to like help fund the military and like just a very small handful of other things. Like it was the states, no state should be sending $360 billion to the federal government for them to then send to Pakistan and India and everywhere else in the Ukraine and everywhere else in the world. Like the states should be collecting the taxes they need to take care of what they need to do as states for their people. And beyond that, like that's it. Like we should not be funding as some massive federal government. So yeah, like New York should just state we're not going to send all this money to the federal government. California, Oregon, Washington, they should all of the liberal states start there. We're not going to send all of these tax dollars to the federal government. We're going to cut taxes. We're going to fund what we want to fund, and we're not sending anything to the federal government. Do it. Fucking do it. That's what every state should be doing anyway. Like, we should not be bankrolling this massive thing. So I'm all for it. Like, yeah, stop sending money to the federal government. Start withholding that. Do it. Or fuck off and leave and secede. Do it. See how that works out too. The thing is, they would have to do something like she's proposing. They would have to join Canada and be rolled into that economic center. Like they wouldn't be able to, New York State would not be able to just maintain on its own as an independent New York. The same for California, or say California, Washington, and Oregon all decided to secede and become the independent state of Calorington or whatever. Like they wouldn't be able to sustain independently from the U.S. without becoming part of something else. So, because when you look at the financials for these big progressive states and the amount of money that they've spent on all of these big social programs and stuff, they can't fund themselves. They would be bankrupt within 4 to 5 years. There's like I gotta find it. There's an article about like this big health plan proposal for New York State that would effectively put everybody on like a single payer Medicare for all type of a system that, the Canadian style of health insurance or health coverage that they want, that all the psychotic progressives are talking about wanting. And there was a study that was done on the plan that showed the amount of money it would take just to cover that health care plan for the state of New York was over double what the state of New York takes in tax revenue annually anyway. So like there's no way to fund that without running your taxes through the roof. And then if you do that, then everybody who lives in the state, like, what are you going to do? Triple your taxes in order to fund this plan and then have everybody in the state just be like, deuces? Not going to work. And that's how all these big progressive policies and spending plans are in these liberal states. They have to have something else to support them. Otherwise, they're fucked. So, see how all that works. Anyway, it's fun to talk about this kind of stuff. I don't think anything's going to happen secession wise or withholding tax dollars wise or otherwise, but you never know. That'll do it for today. I will be back here in about an hour and a half with Johnny doing Peddling Fiction. And then from there, I will see you on Monday. So have a good one, everybody. Later.